When you're getting to certain levels and you're going up, somebody come see you.
And want to come talk to you?
Somebody come and see you and to help you go to the next level. A lot of people, you know how you might see somebody that's not that talented or not that funny or whatever, and all of a sudden they be all the way up here and you trying to figure out how that happened. Now I'm going to rephrase this question. Have anybody came to visit you?
Nah, hell nah. Nah. I don't think they gonna try to do that.
We've got your ass. We've got your ass now.
Actress, author, and activist Rika Alexander talks about her family's spiritual history.
You know, as
now both your parents were orphans. How did they meet? Your aunt being a witch?
my grandmother was a witch.
Both your
My grandmother was a witch. She died in witchcraft, and she had a little cafe, you know, a hole in the wall, and she would put dust over the door, so when people came in, the bell would ring, and dust would fall on them. They called it goofer dust. Well, right across the street was her competitor, and they would have goofer dust too. So she would go back and forth to down deep south, New Orleans, all that, where you from, you know, and go get stronger and stronger goofer dust. She came back and they said she was all twisted up with her head in between her legs, barking like a dog.
Wow. Ooh, that voodoo, that roots, boy, I'm telling you, have you coughing up frogs.
The women in the church went to go get my eventual godfather, which was William Griffith. He left 3 days, they fast, and they pray, and then they come back, and then they laid hands on her. They got her through it, and he says, daughter, the Lord told me to tell you that if you go back, you'll come back in a box. No, Rev, I promise I gave that up. And 2 weeks later, they brought her home in a box.
You meet?
Well, you know, as orphans do in church.
Okay.
You know, they're both their godfather, or I should say like their godfather, was the evangelist in town. He was the bishop. His name is Bishop W.C. Griffin. And he became the bishop of that northwest half of America. Bishop Blake in L.A. took over for him. I mean, in a way, I'm from church royalty, if you look at it that way. I mean, he was a really heavy dude, but then they were just in the dust bowl of New Mexico, and it was a very Southern Gothic existence. My grandmother was a witch. She died in witchcraft. My father started to preach and was ordained since he was 6 years of age. They said he was a special child, that he literally would sit on a porch and people would come up, and before he could even walk, he would stand up, do scripture, and then go back to playing.
Wow.
My father, who was prone to exaggeration and, as to say, straight up lying, would say some of these stories, but my mother, who was not, said, no, Erica, it was very true.
Wow.
And they went around in a car, and they would go on reservations or wherever they were called, live in people's garages. And he was a healer. They would bring him in, and what would happen, there would be a few people in the audience at first. They would pitch a tent, and then he would pray, do something, and then everybody would heal. Everybody would hear about a person who was healed, who they knew their whole life had some ailment or sickness.
Wow.
And then the next night, there would be tons of people overflowing, Indian, Mexican, white, black, to see this young healer. That was my dad.
And that's crazy because your dad
fascinating.
got sick at early, 35.
Right.
Wow.
He got sick.
Nobody could heal him?
You know, it's funny. He died. They gave him a church in East New York. And before he died, I made some peace with him because he wasn't the kindest person. And he said he wished that that God had healed him, and he always wondered why. Sorry. And I wondered too.
I always
Thank you.
You said so much that I wanted that. Like, first of all, your aunt being a witch.
Yeah, my grandmother.
Grandmother being a witch.
His mother was a witch.
And
She
you
would
said
go
she
down and
died
get
from
goof
witchcraft?
dust. Well, she would go. Listen, she had a restaurant. You know, black people, we do so many things, catering and all that. So back in the day, you really didn't have a life job. You would do things, and she had a little cafe, you know, a hole in the wall, and she would put dust over the door, so when people came in, the bell would ring and dust would fall on it.
Oh no!
Yes, they called it goofer dust. Well, right across the street was her competitor, and they would have goofer dust too. So she would go back and forth to down deep south like, you know, New Orleans, all that. Yeah,
New
deep,
Orleans,
where you're from, you know, and go get stronger and stronger formulas. Well, one time she came back, and by the way, she would just leave my father, so he'd just be on the streets. One time she came back, and a Mexican family took him in, and he didn't even remember English, and they begged her to let him stay. Let Roberto stay, please, Roberto. They called him Roberto, and she took him. But she came back, and they said she was all twisted up with her head in between her legs, barking like a dog.
Wow.
Ooh, that voodoo, that roots, boy, I'm telling you, have you coughing up frogs.
And they said that the women in the church went to go get my eventual godfather, which was William Griffith, and he came, saw it, he left 3 days, he went and they fast, and they pray, and then they come back, and then they laid hands on her, and they got her through it. And this is the story now.
Wow.
So I'm just telling you what they got her through it. And when she came out of it, he says, "Daughter, the Lord told me to tell you that if you go back, you'll come back. You'll come back in a box." No, Rev. I promise. I gave this up. I'm not going to give it. He said, "I'm just telling you what the Lord told me to tell you." And that my father's last memory of his mother is her getting in a car, a red Cadillac, because her boyfriend's name was Red, and he would just drive through and take her away. And him begging her, "Please, Mom, don't go. Don't worry, Robert, I'll be back." And 2 weeks later, they brought her home in a box.